Good morning, everyone. I'm Jen White, host of 1A, produced by WAMU in Washington, D.C., and distributed nationally by NPR. So, a question. When was the last time you watched a newscast, or you scrolled through social media, or even had a conversation with a friend or neighbor, and on the other side of that experience, you felt optimistic? Now, some people, not all, might argue if Charles Dickens was writing about the US and the world today, he may have written, "It was the worst of times and the even worse than we thought it was of times." But are we right? Are there reasons to feel optimistic about this moment in human history and optimistic for the future? So let's explore these questions together. We're here with Anthony Romero, Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union. Preet Bharara, he's a partner at Wilmer Hale and host of Stay Tuned with Preet. And Zachary Karabell, he's the founder of the Progress Network at New America, where he hosts the podcast, What Could Go Right? He also writes the Edgy Optimist newsletter. So Zachary, I should say we're largely having this conversation because of you. And I think it's a conversation people are eager to hear because so many of you came. But I think it's helpful to start with a definition because we're not talking about a Pollyanna-ish view of the world that's not rooted in reality. So what are we talking about when we say optimism?
So first of all, it's great that so many people turned out for this. You walk around the campus in Aspen, it's a beautiful day, everything is expansive, the birds are chirping. It calls to mind the Timbuk 3 song, My Future is So Bright, I've Got to Wear Shades. And it's easy to forget briefly that we are kind of swimming in a daily dystopian soup of despair, and that our news diet, our social media diet, our social conversations diet tends to be an endless litany of everything that is going wrong on a daily basis, from we're all going to burn because the climate's going to heat up, we're going to descend into an autocratic, anti-democratic world of disparate parts, we're going to have an economic collapse based on drowning in a tsunami of debt, we are losing our social bonds in a social media world where we no longer have real conversations.
Zachary, when
we're
do we
staring
get
at our
the
phone.
optimism piece of this?
I know. I'm just highlighting the fact that this is how we tend to spend our days. And I think that optimism should not be a things are going to go right. Is my mic not working? Mm-hmm. All right, well, there you go. Obviously, a proof statement, QED, right there. So I've been trying for the past years to say, look, we are, in financial terms, radically over-indexing for Armageddon and under-indexing for utopia. And the point of that is not that I have any particular conviction that the future will be better. And I don't think optimism should be understood in those terms. I think we should crib from the theoretical physicist David Deutsch, who talked about optimism as a level of humility of none of us know the future. We do not know future outcomes. We spend a lot of time trying to game out future outcomes, but we don't know them. And there are endless possibilities that the future holds, and we are all of us daily in the process of writing that future, of living our daily lives to construct that future. And how we do that and what we do and how we try to create that matters greatly to what it's going to be. But there is a humility to we don't know that should preclude the certainty that we do know, and there is far too much, in my view, certainty that we think we know that future outcomes are bad. And not enough humility that future outcomes are undetermined and are in the process of being determined by our decisions. So I think that's where optimism becomes not a, wow, things are going to be great. It becomes a, we have the capacity to make things much better. And part of the way that we do that is by highlighting the ways in which things are going on daily that are not the news, that are in fact incredibly positive, whether it's disease, whether it's communities, whether it's what's going on at multiple parts of the world that just don't become news, right? Because news is not about good things. News is about bad things. The narrative of news is crisis, and that's always been true.
Well, I want to bring Preet in here. Preet, what do you make of that definition?
I think it's a good optimistic definition. I guess what's complicated about talking generally and generically about optimism versus pessimism, in the law we talk about something as applied. So you have something in theory, depending on the particular issues we're talking about. If we're talking about the courts, if we're talking about the economy, if we're talking about crime, depending on the issue and the topic, I think a little bit the idea of optimism and pessimism vary, and the balance between those things does vary and perhaps should vary. I also think it's interesting that we always think about optimism and pessimism. That's the whole ball game, and you have a pie chart, and some of it is how optimistic versus pessimistic. There's sort of a pragmatism, I think, that also comes into play. That is neither optimistic nor pessimistic, and that's best exemplified. I just remembered it this morning by one of the great lines from George Carlin, the comedian, who said, some people see a glass and say it's half full. Some people see a glass and say it's half empty. I see a glass that's twice as big as it needs to be. I find that to be very profound. I'm not sure how, but I'm sure Anthony can explain how profound.
Anthony, I won't ask you to explain the punchline, but I will ask you, in your work, where you find an intersection between optimism and realism.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that question, and I definitely want to reflect on that. I think the one point I might take a little bit of issue with you, Zachary, is that it's not so much about predicting the future, but it's also about seeing the present and being clear-eyed and being a realist in terms of describing what is a current status quo that you are in, and recognizing that is an essential part of it. I look at the current political environment. I'm not an economist. That's for other folks who are in the room. My focus is on civil liberties and civil rights, and I am definitely pessimistic, right? So I'm here to give you the balance on this panel. I mean, why am I pessimistic? I mean, there are three big buckets of real troubling events that make me very pessimistic about where we are right now. Number one is that our government is targeting institutions and individuals for action because they disagree with those ideologies or values of the government. And it's everything from the law firms like Preet's law firm, to the universities, Harvard or Columbia, to the targeting of students who are protesting and who are finding their visas revoked or jailed or incarcerated. But the idea that we are targeting individuals because of their political ideology, it's a modern day McCarthy, I say. So that's bucket number one that has me concerned. Bucket number two is the targeting of politically weak groups to score cheap political points. And the efforts around the targeting of immigrants, the deportation efforts, the scapegoating of the transgender community, making them the other, the way in which we are doing everything we can to kind of divide rather than to unite. And then the third one is the targeting of institutions and norms that bind a functioning democracy, whether it's the courts, whether it's a system of checks and balances, whether it's overriding Congress. And so when I look at those three events, I've been in my job 24 years, and so I have had a lot to compare it to, but I've never quite seen it at this scale, at this volume. And so being clear-eyed about the present, even as I channel optimism in doing the work, and I can then come back to your question about how you can't do the work I do and live in pessimism. You've got to be an optimist. You've got to channel that optimism, because otherwise it gets impossible to do, and you're up against all odds. This week was a miserable week for morale at the office. Yesterday's Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court decisions earlier in the week, there were 4 decisions, one that everyone's focused on, birthright citizenship, but there were many others. And it's hard to come after a week and say, okay, what are we doing about this moment? But yet we do, and that's when you rally, use optimism as your fuel to take the next step And I think that's where how we channel on this side of it.
So, Zachary, I was headed your way because I want to hear your response.
Oh, how quickly we go from a talk about optimism to the reality of people's pessimism. And that is part of the problem of talking about optimism in a pessimistic time, which is it is inevitably couched in a yes, but. Think about it. If you say that we are making immense strides in this country, let alone globally, in terms of maternal health, it is almost incumbent upon you to caveat that with, yes, but there are multiple areas of the country with underserved communities and poorer people where that isn't true. But if you make a statement, as Anthony has just did, about all the things that are besetting us, there is no particular obligation to go yes, but, and point out something else that offsets that in the sense of the human condition improving. That is simply a fact. We are not in an age where reflection and commentary about things that are going well can stand on its own because it feels like an affront to everything that we are so manifestly aware isn't going well. So let's take one thing about democracy for a minute, which I think many people feel is either under assault or weakening, or the fibers of American democracy in particular are fraying at the edges. In 2020, 2022, and the midterms 2024 in the presidential election, and also 2018 to some degree, there was more voter turnout than there had been since the 1970s. For 50 years, there was less and less public activity in our democracy. One of the effects of Trump, or one of the effects of our current age, is that more and more people, including more and more young people, are voting and are participating in the political process. Now, we may feel like the results of that participation are suboptimal at best, but we could also recognize and to some degree celebrate the fact that a more engaged citizenry, over time, if we believe in this thing called democracy, is more likely than not to lead to results that I think we all collectively believe that we want. But those realities get completely dwarfed by our daily focus on things that some of us and many of us and most of us, I don't know, in this room probably most of us, don't like and don't accept. And I think, again, the challenge is to hold two truths to be self-evident simultaneously, that we are simultaneously capable of hideous ugliness and incredible creativity. And I'll just leave that with, the McCarthy analogy is perfect, but what was fascinating about the 1950s was that Americans on the whole were incredibly optimistic about their future. You know, we were going to have nuclear-powered cars and sort of the Jetsons, even though the Jetsons came a little bit later, in the midst of that McCarthyist purge. And that is certainly not the case today.
Preet, I want to focus in on this yes, but around optimism that Zachary just talked about. And play with that a little bit and call it a yes and. So, yes, we should be optimistic, and we should be mindful of what pitfalls around optimism.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true, and it goes back to the point about balance. You know, if you think of optimism in pessimistic times as being a kind of a synonym for hope, then it kind of makes a little bit more sense. At least it clicks in my head. And that does not mean that you're sort of you have blinders on and you're not looking at what's around you. But for the human condition to progress, and for you to sort of deal with your life and deal with the terrible things that are going on around you, I think of optimism / hope in those circumstances to be a necessary attribute of your thinking. And so it's an essential thing in all circumstances, even if you're in the most dire circumstances imaginable. I was a prosecutor for a long time. And this is sort of parallel to what Anthony was saying. And it's a lot of it's nasty work. And by definition, you come up against and you hear about and you learn about and you study and you investigate the worst things that human beings do to other human beings, including flying planes into buildings, killing children, burning cooperating witnesses, obstructing justice, stealing old people's money, all of their lives, like terrible things. And yet I found that the office that I led, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, notwithstanding that you walk down the hallway, every box that you would see would have evidence in it of terrible, terrible things. And yet it was one of the more hopeful and optimistic places I've ever been because everyone there was rowing in the same direction to counteract the bad things. That's what Anthony's organization does, right? When the worst things happen, good people come forward. Now, are you going to win every battle? No. Is it going to take some time to win those battles? Yes. I mean, look, the ultimate epilogue about McCarthyism is McCarthyism was defeated.
Yep.
Right? On the and or the but, I forget which conjunction makes sense for what I'm about to say.
We're sticking with and.
I just used a semicolon. You can't over-index the other way either, right? Because too much optimism can be equated with complacency. And as terrible, I don't know how people are going to react to this question, to the group. I'll speak for myself. In November of 2008, I remember literally jumping up and down on the bed when Barack Hussein Obama got elected President of the United States. And I thought, like a lot of people thought, and he ran on hope, he ran on optimism, right? That's how he got elected. That's how he galvanized so many people, and it was a great message. It's pretty much always a great message. Whether you're running for mayor of the city of New York or you're running for president of the United States. And you know what? I think a lot of people, myself included, turned the dial too far over. And I'm not going to say that everyone got complacent, but probably a little bit we did. And probably a little bit we're a little too negative and pessimistic about. Remember, Trump lost, the first time out. When people ask me, what's the inspiration that I should have to fight these battles when you're talking about law and order, you're talking about the rule of law, you're talking about democracy, you're talking about civil rights, and all those things. You know what I say? I say the inspiration is Trump. Donald Trump is your inspiration. You know why? Because there has been no politician, arguably, who was at a lower ebb in modern American history than Donald Trump the day that he lost the election, or we all know that he lost the election, in November of 2000. And it seems like a perverse model, so I don't quite mean it, but you know what I'm saying. And he turned it around, whether you like it or not. He didn't give up. His people didn't give up. His people didn't let pessimism override them, even though they were handed a blistering, withering, decisive defeat, notwithstanding later court cases, but a blistering defeat, humiliation, followed by all sorts of other things that happened and were exposed about that person and that movement. So take a page from that. Things are bad, but you can turn it around.
And you said 2000. I think you meant 2020, the 2020.
2020, yeah.
Yeah. That makes me curious, Zachary, because what I hear undergirding a lot of the conversations we have is this question about not just individual optimism, but shared optimism, which requires perhaps a shared vision of what this country can or should be. We also know that we're in a time of heightened political polarization. We don't live in communities that are diverse economically, racially, religiously. It's rare that you find truly diverse neighborhoods nowadays. So if we're talking about a collective optimism, how do we get there?
So first of all, there is, or at least there has been, a certain cyclicality to this. As mentioned before, during the height of McCarthyism, Americans were widely optimistic about their future and about their collective ability to create a better future. The 1990s in both the European Union and in the United States, wild periods of optimism, particularly around the internet and technology and the end of the Cold War and the fact that we were going to have some sort of magical fusion of markets going up, internets creating connectivity, and political peace breaking out, that the essential needs of humanity were going to be met as never before into the new millennia, Y2K notwithstanding as a blip. And we are clearly in, if that was an apex, this is a nadir. Now, there's no guarantee that that nadir is not a permanent trough, right? We don't know how we get out of these things. It's not entirely clear how we evolved into them. I mean, you could explain the 1950s a little bit in terms of the end of World War II and a generation that really had thought they had fought the good war. You could probably explain the 1990s a bit because of the end of the Cold War and also because of the excitement of these new technologies. I do think there is a problem in the United States of how we view the past, meaning a lot of the pessimism about the present, and this is true for both the right and the left in the United States, is predicated, I believe, on a rosy-eyed view of the past that the United States simply doesn't merit. There was an immense amount of ugliness, from slavery to racism to all of it in the past. And I think that that shapes our sense of decline in the present in a way that precludes us recognizing that not only have we been imperfect, we've been really bad in a lot of ways.
Right.
And our really badness in the present, in my view at least, is not as much of a break from the past. Now, you'd think that should make you pessimistic, but it can actually make you recognize that we've had, in many ways, a vibrant, flawed democracy with an incredible set of ugly flaws. And I think that can also change the aperture of the view of the present, which I think many people, again, right and left, feel is some sort of an aberration rather than an extreme part of a continuum.
Anthony, I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought us back to the historical context. The 1950s was no walk in the park for black folks in the South, right? So this idea that it was the high point of where America was doing well. I mean, remember Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. I mean, we're really at the height of that moment. There was a lot of explicit racism and terrorism of the black community in the South. And so part of what I get saddened by the moment, I want to come back to this, is the fact that after having built a response, after having engineered kind of societal responses to America's great original sin, chattel slavery, we put in place civil rights laws and administrations and agencies to kind of level the playing field. And in this moment, our government is engaged in a wrecking ball to tear all that down. They use the words DEI. It's not about DEI. It's not about a workshop around white racism or trigger warnings. It is much more fundamental. It is all about undoing the great experiment of racial equality. That is what they are about. So that's why I think that this particular moment is a challenge. Now, I also want to be clear. Being a pessimist and taking no action, I have no time for you. So if you're one of those people, do not come up and talk to me afterwards, because life is way too short, right? And there are a lot of folks who are like that. Pessimists who, oh, I can't bear to watch the news. Oh, I can't open your emails. Oh, I can't respond to your phone calls. I'm like, well, you need to change that attitude. You can take a break, walk away, put away the phone, don't watch MSNBC, it'll drive you nuts anyway, no offense. But come back into the fray. This is not a time for clear-eyed, pessimistic spectators. This is not that time, right? So optimism, where we get optimism, I was really bummed out yesterday. I channeled my best self in a panel because I had to. Today, I'm not so much, right? I'm leaving Aspen tomorrow, so I'm sad. But the birthright citizenship argument that the Supreme Court rendered yesterday, I thought we would win. I was in the court. I thought this one was really going to be easy for the Supreme Court to keep the nationwide injunctions for birthright citizenship. I actually gamed it totally wrong. And the thing that got me going is when I got the call, before I went on stage yesterday to talk about immigration, I called my office. I'm like, when are you filing that class action, right? Because if they said no nationwide injunctions, the only way to get that done is a nationwide class, and my top lawyer said, oh, we'll do it Monday, Tuesday. I'm like, no, sweetheart. No. You will file that lawsuit in an hour or two. I'm announcing it on stage at Aspen Institute, so you got to keep the boss honest. I did not announce it. He did not know that, right? Because I had to get them all working their asses off to file within 2 hours. And the minute we filed, we bounced back, right? Because that's what you do, right? Optimism is not a precursor to action. Action is the precursor to optimism, right? And I think that's where I come out from all this clear-eyed assessment of what the status quo is, but you got to get in there and you got to do your best. And now all of you can be ACLU lawyers filing lawsuits in federal court on class actions, but all of you can be involved in your local communities. You can kind of be involved with soup kitchens. You can be kind to someone in your communities. There are ways for you to manifest in the face of such mendacity and such vitriol and such negativity, to just be present as a positive person in the world is an act of defiance, right? And so,
but I do want to ground this in the reality of where we are at this moment in the country. Because while you're getting lots of applause here,
right.
Preet, the reality is that half of the country would have a very different response.
Totally.
So when we talk about the action of optimism and creating a shared vision for the future of the U.S., how do we do that in this moment?
You've got to look for inspiration to the people who are taking the action. That's one response that I have. And I think this is a little bit of an indirect answer to your question, but as Anthony was speaking, I was thinking about the parallel situation that's personal to me that was mentioned earlier, and that is my law firm, WilmerHale, was one of the few that got an executive order, but you may have heard about or read about, which for non-lawyers maybe doesn't seem as dramatic as it actually is. It's unlawful, it's unconstitutional, it's un-American. Today, it's a big law firm like mine or one of the other ones. Tomorrow, it's any single American's access to counsel of their choice, not just the rich, not just the companies, but everyone in the country. And there was a period of terrific pessimism when those executive orders started coming out. And like Anthony was talking about with the Supreme Court yesterday, I didn't know what my firm was going to do because there are business considerations. And then we saw some other firms do something that I found very demoralizing, and it was very deeply upsetting to see, a proud, storied law firm. I won't mention names.
Paul Weiss.
We're a good team. Or another firm.
Cadwalder.
Is this being taped? Is this going out?
On TV.
I should say,
Yes.
we may bring this back to our audience, so just heads up.
But just to finish the point, and you saw firms that had to hear the President of the United States sort of giggling and laughing about how these powerful multi-billion-dollar firms, whose job it is, it's like literally the job, whose job it is to fight overreaching by the government, among other things, in Trump's words, bend the knee.
Yeah.
And I said within my firm that I thought I would never be prouder of any place than when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, given the work that we did there. And I had to amend that because we got an executive order on a Thursday, I think 5 p.m. We didn't do it in 2 hours, but we went to court the next morning, 13 hours later, and filed for a temporary restraining order, which we got that day, got a preliminary injunction some weeks later, and of all the firms that have sought relief against these really disgusting executive orders, they've gotten them. So go back to the question, how do you galvanize people? Over the course of time, I think lawyers should draw comfort from the fact that the ones who fought won and maintained their dignity and their integrity and their commitment to being officers of the court who are responsible for improving conditions for everyone and making sure that the rule of law is observed and strengthened, and that the firms and that the firms that didn't do that are on a different path that should not be emulated. And Anthony has his story about yesterday. I have my story. All of you work in places where those stories are happening and unfolding and taking place. try to be on the side of the ones who are fighting back, and finding inspiration from the ones who are fighting back in whatever context you find yourself being pessimistic.
Go ahead, Zach.
So I want to bring this outside the U.S. context for a moment, because this has become kind of a conversation about the ails of the United States, which we all know. So first of all, there is a global epidemic of people being radically discontent with the systems that they find themselves living in. This is not a purely American phenomenon. There are very few parts of the world, if you travel around the world, that feel good about their present and positive about their future. Maybe Saudi Arabia, maybe the UAE, few little pockets of the world is our oyster and we're going to construct our future. And that is unfolding in a set of conditions where 8 billion people on the planet throw away 30% of their food because we live in a world of caloric abundance, political stability relative to most parts of the past, a certain amount of individual freedoms and autonomy, high levels of education, high levels of literacy, physical shelter being almost ubiquitous. And again, I could do the yes, but. Yes, there are 800 million people who do not have enough calories, and there are 8 billion people who do. But in general, never have more people lived on the planet Earth and had more of their material needs met and taken care of and been more pissed off. And that dichotomy of the material conditions in which we find ourselves and the way in which most human beings are now relating to that is one of the great conundrums and mysteries of our age. But I do not feel that there is anything wrong with celebrating those realities as realities. I don't think there's anything wrong with celebrating the fact that whether Jonathan Haidt is right or wrong about the ills of social media, we walk around today with an instrument in our pocket that contains the entire corpus of human knowledge for us to check in with and check into and resolve. You know, it used to be that at a dinner table, the person who shouted loudest was right. Now you can actually look it up and say no. That our ability to move around and be connected, and it is not just an affluent thing, it is not just a privileged thing that is true at Aspen but not true for the rest. People are moving around the world, they are moving within their communities, they are meeting their needs and trying to meet their needs in a way that most human beings for most of history would have found inconceivable, unknowable, and impossible. And I really believe strongly that we need to hold those truths to be part of the truth of the warp in which we are existing every day, that it does no dishonor to the issues that Preet and Anthony and all of us deal with and know. But if we forget that, it is easy to get drawn into a vortex where that perspective gets totally lost.
So I want you to take this down to a really practical level, Zachary, because yes, we have those little computers in our pocket and we're inundated with information 24/7. It's driven by algorithms most of us don't even understand. If we are trying to reshape the lens through which we view the world, what are practical ways to do that at an individual level?
Look, I think all of us, there's also huge dichotomies between how people express their local lived reality and what they think the collective reality is. So people will routinely say they think their school is fine, but they think the education system is not. They think their local representatives are good, but they think politics is not. And to the degree that we can identify on a daily basis what we believe to be real in our daily lives. Now, some of what's real in our daily lives, if you're Anthony and Preet and dealing with people whose daily lives are being massively disrupted, that's a daily reality that you need to honor. But a lot of us have daily realities that are, it's as simple as either giving thanks or recognizing what is. That we have health care and systems at our ready that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents would have been agog at. It would have been an incredible thing to behold. And whether or not you have to wait 15 more minutes in the office to get that doctor, you're getting a level of treatment that would have been inconceivable. And I think recognizing little aspects of this, that when there's a sickle cell anemia cure, which had largely been an African-American, it is an issue particularly, and had been ignored for generations, and finally, between genomics and all the techniques and technologies we have, there is now a cure for that. Like, it is worth taking a moment and going, oh, right, that is something worth celebrating.
But then you have to think about the measles.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
hence the yes, but for you.
Yes, and. We're yes-anding today. That's what we're doing.
And by the way, I don't feel the need to say yes and about this because the and the buts are so prevalent. And this panel is proof of it, right? The waterfront of all the things that we know to be wrong is well covered and well understood. And if in 7 or 8 years or 10 years or 17 years, between climate change, the erosion of democracy, the collapse of economies, all of our current fears prove to be true, it will not be for lack of really smart people highlighting all the ways in which that is a manifest risk, including people like Preet and Anthony. But maybe we're wrong.
Anthony, I want you to jump in here because I think you may have some thoughts.
I mean, I think I'm all for the idea of recognizing everything that's around us and everything that's been accomplished and giving thanks. But that's not really enough, right? And I don't mind using the but. It's my role. You have to take individual action and responsibility. I know a lot of very happy people in wonderful circumstances who I just want to shake at times. I'm like, you all have something more to contribute. And it can be contributing to organizations, right? You don't have to be a billionaire to make a difference. Half of my budget comes from ordinary rank and file people, right? Those are the heroes. I love George Soros. I hope he lives another 100 years. It's unlikely. But the rank and file members are the ones who keep us alive and keep us going. And so get involved. Support not the ACLU. Support the Democracy Forward. Support democracy defenders. Support your local soup kitchens. Small contributions make a real difference. I know that's hard to believe in a moment of such kind of extravagant weddings like the one in Venice, but $10 will make a difference. It really does. Then get involved. Get engaged. Get proximate, like Brian Stevenson says. And spend your time, spend your energy, spend your capital. Try to convince people around you. Get out of a bubble in your own head or in your own family. And that's where I worry about. I mean, I hear you speak, and there are lots of people who I know live wonderful, blessed lives and don't do much else to make a difference for anyone else other than just live their blessed lives. And I think that's what's unfortunate. The only reason why it's gotten better is because you've had people who've been willing to expend energy and time and blood, sweat, and tears to try to make a difference in the world. It doesn't just happen organically, right? More people are fed because there's been an effort to fight world hunger, right? It's not just because, oh, I have a great garden and everything in there is edible, right? No, there are people who are trying to level the playing field. And those change agents need the support of people like you all.
Well,
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're going to take some time now for questions. We'll have a microphone circulating. So if you raise your hand, we can walk a mic down to you. Let's start over here. And I'll just point out that what I'm hearing across the panel, regardless of the but or and, is that what you want people to do is start with yes. Yes, and a willingness to do something. Go ahead.
I had the opportunity to ask Judge Ludwig, the very famous conservative judge, who spoke out for impeachment and had very little support. Is it going to take 10 years, hopefully, for us to recover? And he said, no, 20. So given your time frame that you were saying, Zachary, are you optimistic or pessimistic past 20 years?
Look, I think cultural change happens slowly and then incredibly suddenly. And the vertiginous speed at which things can happen is breathtaking. I mean, if you were a student at Moscow State University in July of 1989 studying Marxist-Leninist thought, and 6 months later, it's all poof, gone as an ideology. The Berlin Wall coming down, I mean, it was many years in the making, but it was very quick in the happening. And so, look, I don't know the 20 years, the 5 years, the 10 years. I know that countries and cultures emerge from a stupor or a bad dream in an instant, or they don't.
Yeah.
But I think the assumption that it will take forever because we're now reading the tea leaves of the present and thinking that it will is certainly a possibility. It is equally possible that we wake up from a fever dream and turn around. And there was a McCarthy moment. I mean, that, have you no shame, Senator, was a bursting of a bubble. Now, it's not true that everything was just Hosanna and everybody thought, fine, if you want to be a communist in 1959, that was cool just because McCarthy was censured and died as a drunk. But, there was.
May he rest in peace.
Thank you, Anthony. I didn't mean to speak ill of the.
I'm just trying to be an optimist.
Unbecoming of me.
But what I hear you saying, and it circles back to what we started with, is that it's about not assuming we know what the future will be. Other questions?
By the way, I totally agree with anything you said. I mean, I don't think anyone should consider anything I'm saying as a kumbaya hosanna that we should all just sit back and enjoy all the fruits of generations of labor. I mean, it is absolutely the case that we all need to make.
I actually agree with you. If I jump in, it's okay?
Absolutely.
I mean, I actually think the Make America Great is an opportunity for us to harvest individuals who are in that camp. Some of my family members, some of my closest family members, I love them, and they must not love me very much. But I believe that we will harvest them. They do actually believe they want to make America great. And I'm not sure I agree with the again, because I think there's a judgment there. But I think when they don't make this country better for my working class family members, and they still are having a hard time getting affordable housing or jobs or putting their kids through school or finding a way to kind of make a living, it will be a moment where we can harvest that kind of like that disappointment, that disillusionment, and say, let's talk to you about how we actually improve our collective status. And so I'm actually quite hopeful that there will be moments when we will be able to bring folks back. And I don't know if it takes 10 or 20 years, but I think it's all in the works. And I do think it happens very quickly. It will be like a torrent.
Right here.
Oh, I'm just wondering, with the talking about individual action, et cetera, what do you think about protest movements joining? Do you think that's a help? Do you think it makes any difference? Do you think we should participate?
Yes, absolutely. Look, and I will say, look, so with respect to all things, you can be pessimistic about some of this, given the legal imbroglio going on in California, right? Where freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, the sanctity of protest in this country that's been there from the founding is at risk, literally at risk from like the Marines, which is not an overstatement, right? And you care about that, and you're doing something about that. In the face of that kind of action, of the calling of the National Guard, for the first time in 6 decades, without the blessing of the governor of the state, for these reasons and these purposes, protest more. You know, the first time you have 50,000, the next time you have 100,000 out there. So that's the easiest question of the afternoon.
And my organization has been very much involved with the rights of protesters, and so we will defend any and all, including Nazis, to protest. What I will say about the current movement on protests is I just wish that some of the organizers, and you know, they're not folks who necessarily listen to me, but I have an opinion. I wish we were working harder to persuade people. And that's where I think burning of cars and vandalism and violence does us no good. And we don't defend vandalism or we believe in the nonviolent protests. I was really sad when I saw a lot of the folks waving the Mexican flag, right? And I will defend their right to wave that flag. And I understand some of their desire to wave the Mexican flag as a nationalist symbol against a nativistic, anti-immigrant country. I just wish they had been waving the American flag. And so I think in a moment like this, when we think about protests, I think it is incredibly powerful, especially in the era of social media, where any little incident can kind of go viral, where you have people from all different walks of life kind of saying no. And so I do encourage you. You don't have to spend your life doing it. You don't have to do a lot. You can do it anywhere you can go. Indivisible is an incredible organization, right? You should sign up. They will deploy you. They have marches in the most wonderful places all over the world, all over this country. So if you haven't signed up, with indivisible, do so, and they will put you to work.
And just for a moment, I did a piece a few weeks ago for my Edgy Optimist and quoted really vile language against protesters, which I think most people, when they read that paragraph, would have assumed came from the president or someone like Tom Homan, but was actually Governor Hodges of Ohio in May of 1970 before calling out the National Guard at Kent State. And the point of doing that is to say there is a long, sad, and ugly American history of violent suppression of free speech and protests, which we need to both honor and recognize if we are ever to deal with the present in a meaningful, constructive way, which is these things are woven through our collective history that we prefer to forget, but I think we really absolutely need to remember. And for me, again, that is actually a source of optimism because it recognizes the profound failings of a society rather than what I think most people seem to feel, which is a profound decline.
But that's also where it gets really the rub, is when you have institutions who then relinquish that right to free speech and protest. Like a lot of the large media companies, ABC News shamefully settling with the Trump administration on the Stephanopoulos interview. It's shameful. Paramount possibly walking this dance with the president. The law firms that capitulated. I mean, they do us a disservice when they don't stand up for their rights. It's like some of the folks saying, I don't believe in freedom of speech, I got nothing to say. Well, waiting until you have something to say to be concerned about freedom of speech is way too late, right? And that's where I think we just have to kind of make sure we hold people accountable.
Let's try to quickly move through a couple of other questions. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Hi, my name is Nivea. I'm 23, and I run a youth civic engagement nonprofit, so I work with high school students, like, a lot. And it's been really interesting, and something I'm worried about is I feel like I've seen a division where you have a lot of young people that are getting really motivated and protesting and are very engaged, but then you have a population that is so disillusioned that they're starting to withdraw, and so that sense of optimism is like is slipping away at a really young age when you should be pretty optimistic and wide-eyed about the world. And so I wonder, like, what has been an effective breakthrough strategy for you guys in terms of like transitioning like pessimism to optimism with like people in your life, like in your circles, because I feel like those types of breakthrough strategies are something that would be really helpful for us as we try to get more young people involved.
Yeah.
I think one of the really important things is, even though I did say change can happen really quickly, you should never expect it to happen really quickly.
Exactly.
And one of the challenges of youth activism is an expectation of it's going to happen now because we're really passionate and we want it to, rather than these are the seeds of something that is going to could germinate, but take a really long time of continued engagement and continued activism and continue to make the argument in the face of those who are either apathetic or disagree. Because disillusionment is really easy, and the work is very hard. And again, that is a recognition of things can change quickly, but they change quickly because generations or a lot of people have taken a lot of time to get to that fulcrum. Not because a bunch of 18-year-olds woke up and went, you know what, I think the world should be different, and then magically it is. And I think that's really important to remember. Like, don't get disillusioned in the face of the glacial pace of change in a world where social media and everything is instantaneous.
I think one additional small point. You have to find examples of success and advertise and promote those things. Now, sometimes things happen with great success on the part of a young person, and it's widely known. CEG, Mayor of New York City race.
Right.
My understanding is that the Run for Something organization had a crazy spike in people who signed up to run for something. That's organic because everyone saw somebody being active and who was not disillusioned, whatever you think of his candidacy. But that's an example of 33 might seem old to you. It seems very, very young to me, so I will count him as young. But find those examples. If you're 33, you should be optimistic no matter what, because you have a long life to live. But find those examples in your community and other communities. Bring those people to come talk to your group, and show folks that in a real and concrete way, somebody tried something and it succeeded, and that gives people, I think, hope and optimism that they can do the same thing.
And I'll just add, and I really want to commend you for the work you're doing. because I think the loss of civic education in schools is so detrimental to the preservation of our democracy. But the thing that I would add, and I'm the moderator, I'm taking a little liberty here, is to show them how close history is to them. We talk about these movements sometimes as if they happened 100 years ago. We were in Birmingham, Alabama, and we did a live audience, a town hall. And we had two people there who'd participated in the 1963 Children's Crusade. They're alive, vibrant. They can tell their stories. And so I think putting young people in proximity to history and those wins and seeing the people and seeing that they're there and that this is all closer than they imagined, I think it can be empowering because it's something they're directly connected to. This isn't their great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. It's their grandfather. It's their grandmother. For me, it's my parents. History is close, and I think the more we can wrap our heads around that, while sometimes it is challenging because that history is messy, it's not just the messy part that's close. It's the places when the country has moved forward. That's close to us too.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone. Preet, Anthony, Zachary, thanks, and thank you.